So you all know that Matt Lauer obviously was in a lot of trouble because of allegations of sexual harassment, significant ones, and then was fired yesterday by NBC News. He was their top star in terms of being a host of the Today Show, which is their most popular program and most profitable one as well. He's their top star in terms of how much money they paid him, which was $28 million a year. But some of the allegations were quite significant. Geraldo Rivera did not see it that way, and he started tweeting. This was a bad idea. So we do want to discuss whether he has any points at all. So let me give you his tweets. He says, sad about Matt Lauer, great guy, highly skilled, and empathetic with guests, and a real gentleman to my family and me, but perhaps not a gentleman to others. Anyway, he says, news is a flirty business, and it seems like the current epidemic of sexual harassment allegations may be criminalizing courtship and conflating it with predation. What about Garrison Keillor? Okay.
Wait, what about him?
So apparently he thinks that was no big deal, and I don't know that. And we discussed this yesterday. I don't know all the details of what Garrison Keillor is accused of, so I can't comment on that. John, I'm going to go tweet by tweet, but let me pause here. Look, I think all these folks are in a tough position when they know and like a person. So he knows and apparently likes Matt Lauer, and their families know each other. So if I was close to someone, it'd be tough. You have to get past that and go, what he did was wrong. Okay, but I think that Geraldo is now saying there is some courtship, right? And it does happen in some office environments, including news. Actually, let me give you one more tweet and then let's talk about it. He says, jerks are jerk in dating. Sexual harassment should be confined to situations where a superior imposes himself on a subordinate who feels unable to complain because of power of perp or feared consequences to victims' employment. Shouldn't be used to get even with bad bosses or hated exes.
But,
yes.
But he's saying this in response to the Matt Lauer stuff, which is exactly what he's saying it should be confined to. So it comes off as bizarre that you're taking this opportunity to say that people are just going wild. That he was the highest paid, perhaps in some ways, most powerful person there. And one of the women specifically said that she went along with a sexual thing because of her fear of losing her job and didn't talk about it immediately afterward because of the shame and probably continued fear about if she had brought it up a few years ago. And they had to decide, should we listen to her or should we, and then fire our $28 million a year earning Matt Lauer? I mean, we know how historically that's gone at a lot of these companies. Maybe they would have given her a little bit of money and then she would have been shuttled out the door. And maybe that's the end of her career.
So I don't think that it's unfair to point out that you shouldn't believe every allegation, and especially if there's going to be any kind of proceeding, and here there isn't. It's just a matter of internal investigation, and Matt Lauer doesn't seem to even disagree with the firing. Certainly hasn't said anything along those lines.
He said some of what has been alleged isn't true. There were some caveats, but he implies that some of it is true.
Yeah, so I just think that Geraldo, even if he were to make this point, and it's a fair point that yes, some small percentage of women might want to, go after bad bosses or people that they were in a relationship with, you at least have to point out that it's a very small percentage of women, because historically and statistically that's the case. And number two, this is a bizarre one to fight on. I mean, I get it because he's friends with Matt Lauer, but it seems like Roger Ailes, who Geraldo also defended in the beginning, he later changed his tune on that, but also described what Roger Ailes was doing as flirty. Both Roger Ailes and Matt Lauer are alleged to have taken their pants off. Ailes chased a woman around the room with his pants off. And so I think that goes way, way beyond flirty.
Yeah, I guess devil's advocate, he might be thinking that he's not specifically responding to the Matt Lauer. It's just, oh, look, another one. Now let me talk in a meta way about all of it. I don't know that that's what he's doing, but that might be how he defends himself. But I think, and look, he's going to undercut himself even more in the next tweet, which is far worse. But the general idea that in this sort of situation, very often, people like Geraldo and others feel the need to say, well, what if they're just coming after bad bosses or hated exes, or what if they're just looking for money? Like, it's not just that, like, he's not necessarily the person to be delivering that message because he's coming off as a guy who's sweating down the back of his neck right now about this whole situation. Let's ignore all of that. To any guy that wants to make that like comment in the future, we got it. Everybody already knows the concern about the possibility that there will be reprisals against bosses or somebody you're pissed off against, or maybe some girl wants money, or maybe some girl lies. Everybody has already heard that point. It's not like, oh my God, Geraldo makes an amazing idea. What if they were lying? We get that. And obviously every case involves looking at the specific details. But when your response largely is just that, it seems like you're more concerned about the man in this case. And in this case, it's a man who clearly did it, Matt Lauer, who did terrible things. And so yes, we're gonna react negatively to this. Everybody already gets the concerns about the possibility of deception. Nobody's ever going to jail without people investigating what actually happened. And so you don't need to continually reiterate it over and over as if that's the only thing that we should be thinking about at this point.
One more tweet from Geraldo. He says sexual harassment allegations should require 1, made in a timely fashion, say within 5 years. 2, some contemporaneous corroboration like witnesses, electronic or written communications. With money settlements in multi-millions, slight chance exists some victims are motivated by more than justice. It does seem like it's a Christine O'Donnell moment when that was a person who ran for Senate in Delaware. She was the Republican and Tea Party candidate, and she famously made an ad saying, "I'm not a witch," where people were like, why were you a witch? Right? And so now Geraldo,
suspiciously, her opponent did not make clear that they weren't a witch or a sorcerer or a necromancer or anything.
Yes, that was weird. Anyway, so Geraldo's wrong about point number 1 because he says, oh, you got to make it within 5 years. But in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, until maybe just a couple of months ago, people were not in a position to be able to come out without fear of reprisals, which there were plentiful. People being fired, which happened all the time. In fact, Roger Ailes was and Bill O'Reilly were accused of firing people if they wouldn't have sex with them. Yeah. So, and you work at Fox News, I think you should be familiar by now with that. And a lot of that happened well past 5 years ago, and that is exactly what was wrong with the culture back then. So saying, oh, if it's 5 years ago, in other words,
you want a grandfather in abuse?
Yeah, it feels like Geraldo's saying that. Remember, whatever you think you might catch me doing was 6 years ago or earlier. Anyway, and a lot of these women have had.
It has to be within you can't make a claim after 5 months, 5 years and 3 months or so.
And like 21 days. I'm not that I means anything. I'm just
within that time. That's enough.
Anyway, and most of these women have contemporaneous corroboration. In fact, the New York Times, Washington Post, different outlets that have reported on the different cases have been methodical in pointing out who they said it to at the time, not just today. Not like, oh, there's stuff going on. To Geraldo's point about, I'd like to get rich. I'm going to say it now when it didn't really happen in the past. No, they told their ex-boyfriends, their husbands, et cetera, et cetera.
Which makes it, at the end of the day, like I'm not intending to offend him, but kind of a stupid point to make. First of all, about the 5 years, that's ridiculous. If you committed a crime, it's a crime. I don't care how long is gone. We can still judge you based on it. But then about the contemporaneous thing, does he think that people are losing their jobs purely based on one comment? They don't look into it at all. There's nothing. No, Matt Lauer did not lose his job without any evidence that it was true whatsoever. Obviously, the companies are already doing those sorts of investigations. In the most high-profile cases, like Harvey Weinstein, like Roy Moore, we have tons of contemporaneous witness statements and other forms of evidence. That's already there, and the people who are doing these investigations know that they need that. It just comes off again as this sort of weird knee-jerk need to do what you think is defending yourself, pointing out stuff that's abundantly clear to everyone who's already been paying attention to this issue.
Look, maybe it's because he's at Fox News and there are allegations of a person we definitely will not name who is looking for money when she was not in this similar situation as many other women at Fox News were. And I don't know if that's what's under his skin. I have no idea because I don't know any of that internal stuff. So guys, look, like to John's point, yes, of course, at some point there'll be a bad actor. Of course, not every person is dropped from heaven and is telling the truth, but the overwhelming majority of them are, right? So it's, think about your balancing here, right? So when people say, I believe the women, what they're saying is, in the past, the women were not believed, right? Geraldo's rule, 5 years ago, they were not believed, right? So it doesn't mean that every woman is telling the truth. And yes, somebody might look for money, and yes, somebody might be mad at an ex or something like that. And yes, that should all be properly investigated. But it doesn't look like Matt Lauer is that case. And like I said earlier, in a Facebook post last fall, as HuffPost explains, Rivera also referred to journalism as a flirty business. He said he regarded one of the former Fox chief's accusers, that's AL's accusers, with, quote, extreme skepticism due to his own personal experiences.
Yeah, and look, news, I guess, can be a flirty business. A lot of businesses are flirty businesses. They tend to be high stress environments where people spend long hours in a small environment with the same people. They have shared experiences of extremely intense natures. I used to be a waiter. They're very incestuous areas, restaurants. Everybody who waits tables can probably attest to that. And there are certainly areas in which some sort of romance is perfectly fine. If there's no power dynamic, and if it's clear that it's a consensual thing that's entered into in a sensitive and delicate fashion, and it's not simply someone creeping someone out, making them afraid to come to work, it's not a boss exercising weird sexual control over their employees, then of course businesses are gonna continue to be a place where people can have relationships. And we do have to have that conversation. It's also possible, hypothetically, that we focus now on this moment we have to actually do something about the habitual, long-term, powerful harassers, get some kind of action, and then we can find out if we can still hook up afterward. Maybe we should attend to the more important stuff first.
Yeah, and look, is news a quote-unquote flirty business? In my limited experience, yes. I don't mean here, but when the tales of local news that I would hear back in the day when I briefly worked in local news, and then the tales I would hear in cable news, they're just secondhand. So, but yes, there are a lot of hookups, and at some point, will one of these cases go too far? Probably, right? What I mean by too far is someone will make a wrong charge, and then there'll be a huge overreaction to that too, and the pendulum will keep on swinging.
One final point. I think I mentioned this in our production meeting this morning, but we very often, like you say, very often they make the case that women could lie. And as you say, well, first of all, it has happened very rarely, not nearly as often as some people would like you to believe that they do, but it could happen. And they will often say, well, the fear is that then that will cause them to not people to not trust women who are telling the truth, which is totally true. But we never actually flip that, where 9 times out of 10, these guys who are accused of this habitually, naturally deny that it happened, but then we find out that it did happen. Aren't they hurting men who are innocent's chances? Why are we never worried about the actions of lying men in this case?
Well, that's a great point too, that's right. So last couple of things here. Apparently in a 2014 interview, Rivera lauded workplace culture in the 70s and 80s and bemoaned contemporary workplace protections. I have a sense that this is not going to end well for Geraldo.
Those madmen, man, they knew what was up.
I don't think that lauding the culture in the 70s and 80s is the right way to go. He said, now if you look at an intern with cross eyes, you go to jail. I mean, you get fired. It was almost like sex was free. You have no HR, no human resources, no workplace rules against it back in the day.
Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Yeah,
what are you talking about?
It is not a good thing that there was no rule of law or human resources to protect anyone back in the day. But for guys like Geraldo and a lot of the other guys at Fox News, and now we find out in other places as well, they did think those were the good old days.
Yeah.
When they were in charge and there were no rules to protect anyone else. Now, this turned out to be obviously a bad idea, so Fox News then said Geraldo's tweets do not reflect the views of Fox News or its management. We were troubled by his comments and are addressing them with him. In other words, oh, for God's sake, what are you doing getting us back in trouble?
Now that's a good statement for them to put out.
Yeah, and then Geraldo finally came back around with a nice backpedal here with reaction to my tweets today on sex harassment makes clear I didn't sufficiently explain that this is a horrendous problem, long hidden, Harassers are deviants who deserve what is coming to them. Often victims are too frightened to come forward in a timely fashion. I humbly apologize. And please do not look into anything I might have done 5 years earlier.
We don't know anything.
Okay, no.
Anything.
Seriously, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah, and again, he's on the periphery of what he's saying. There's conversations that need to be had socially within men as a community. These conversations do need to happen. I think that you're stressing them at a time that is not, in a way, and at a time that is not ideal.
If you become a member of the Young Turks, you'll be saying,
you know, I'm like a smart person.
So do it right now. tytnetwork.com/join. Get the whole Young Turks show every day.